There are deliberate limitations to the convention definition of genocide. Only national, ethnical, racial, and religious groups are included. Excluded are political, social, cultural, linguistic, gender, and sexual orientation groups. And the core acts that constitute genocide are also limited. There was the deliberate exclusion of hate speech as incitement that the USSR had wanted to include, and also the core acts are limited to physical and biological destruction of a group instead of, for example, what Lemkin had been interested in including, which was psychological destruction. The Genocide Convention is considered part of customary international law, and in customary international law, there is also the limitation on the core acts to physical and biological destruction of a group, meaning that even in customary international law, genocide isn't going to include destroying cultural identity, however much anthropologists would argue that this is also genocide because you're changing the group. Now, confirmation of the Genocide Convention status is found in the ICJ opinion on reservations, the Genocide Convention, and also in places like trial chamber decisions from the ICTY, as an example of which is in Kerstich, where the trial chamber said, although the convention was adopted during the same period the term genocide itself was coined, the convention has been viewed as codifying a norm of international law long recognized, in which case law would soon elevate to the level of a peremptory norm of general international law, jus cogens. So what Kerstich was saying was that genocide has long been recognized, but the convention codified it, and then case law then elevates it to a level of a peremptory norm of general international law, right? Jus cogens, no derogation from the rule. The Genocide Convention obliges the prevention and punishment. The Genocide Convention obliges states to prevent and punish the international crime of genocide, and also implied within the duty to prevent genocide is the duty not to commit genocide. While the convention is a convention on the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide, it is a convention mostly written about punishment. We'll look a little bit more in class 8 about the prevention aspect and how the ICJ has interpreted the prevention aspect of the convention as was seen in the case of Bosnia versus Serbia. With respect to the structure, I encourage you to look at the text of the convention carefully. It's on Moodle. You can also find it online. The norms are located in Articles 1, 2, and 3. And by norms, I mean Article 1 makes genocide a crime of international jurisdiction. 2 defines the crime of genocide. And 3 discusses the forms of participation that are prohibited. Now, these are obligations on the individual and the state. And even though, there are more than 100, 150 states that are party to this convention, it doesn't actually matter because, as we discussed, remember, genocide is a peremptory norm. You don't need a treaty or an agreement to make this a crime of international concern. Article 4 of the Genocide Convention provides there is no immunity for the crime of genocide. Article 5 says that states are required to criminalize genocide. Now, the definition, all international criminal tribunals since after the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg have relied on the definition of genocide as reflected in the Genocide Convention, which is regarded as customary international law. It's a peremptory norm. Some domestic courts have modified the definition slightly. They may have added political groups. They may have stated that the intent to destroy has to be in a whole or substantial part. We'll discuss that more in class 4. But in the Genocide Convention and as part of customary international law, the crime of genocide describes conduct that tries to destroy a protected group. And what makes genocide a particularly difficult crime to prove is, again, the dolus specialis, the genocidal intent directed at one of the